so-called flying saucers.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. It's rotating.
Welcome to Kill the Stigma. So what you're about to see is a conversation with Richard Dolan. I apologize a little bit on my audio. However, he does most of the talking. But the conversation we're about to have is really gold when it comes to the quality of the conversation. Gold. Now, I was nervous. It's my first interview, so I didn't give him a proper introduction. And I wanted to, put his literature out there, which is UFOs, National Security, Volume 1, Volume 2. That is a must read for anybody who wants to learn about the history of this topic. The alien agendas, UFOs in the 21st century, which is more like a consolidated kind of like, you want to get updated with the phenomena, read that. USOs. And he's been written 3 volumes when it comes to USOs, and we know that seems to be a big connection when it comes to the water. And I'm sure I'm missing other books up After Disclosure, AD After Disclosure with Bryce Sable, and who knows what else I'm missing. But I was kind of nervous, so I apologize for that. But I think this conversation was amazing. Hopefully next time I can have him for 3 hours. Something like that, so we can really go deep, and I'm hoping that will happen at some point. Anyway, here you guys go. Richard Dolan. All right, welcome to Kill the Stigma. Today I got Richard Dolan, who is famous and needs no introduction. Richard, how you doing today?
Very happy to be here, Christian. Maybe we could tell people you and I know who each other are because, well, we've corresponded quite a bit through my website.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
I want to thank you mostly for, obviously your literature and all that. But one thing that comes to my mind is the Wilson Davis memo. I really appreciate the way you came out in 2019. Like, you really took a strong stand for that. And I think that was a story that was huge and now is obvious.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Specifically.
I'll just say, I said this many times at the time, when that story leaked in 2019, I had 1000% confidence that it was the real deal because, as I said many times, that back then, I knew about this. I talked about this. There's actually old lectures that I gave in 2007, 2008, 2009, where I'll say strongly alluded to this. I didn't mention the fact that there were notes, but I mentioned the fact that Wilson had this experience where he tried and failed to get access to alien or ET technology. And I talked about how I received that story. I still have not given up the name of the individual who showed me several pages of that document back in 2006, long time ago. So I've been very familiar with it. I knew that it was real, a real story, and that is why I didn't mind putting myself out there. I didn't know how long it would take the world to kind of catch up, but it has happened. I'm very glad about that.
Yeah, and it took years. And like a lot of these stories, I feel like important stories, I feel like the community at first fights and gets divided a lot with these big stories, but over time you're able to tell the fruits of certain stories, and that's definitely one of them. Another one of them in history that I want to ask is which had similar consequences is, for example, back in the 80s, the MJ-12 documents and then Majestic. Do you think there's any fruits to those documents as well?
Yeah, it's even to this day, it's not the most popular position to take, but I've always tended to believe there's something legitimate about the entire MJ-12 scenario. I've always believed it. And sometimes, researchers will attack me for that or just, say that I'm wrong. And the thing is, there is a lot of there is known disinformation that exists within the UFO or the UAP field now. And that shouldn't surprise us because this is a subject that has genuine national security implications. And so we should not be surprised that there might be people on the other side trying to muddy the waters. But with MJ12, and particularly, I'm thinking of the majestic documents that are hosted by Ryan and his late father, Bob Wood. Those are a little different from the MJ12 documents. Wow. They're related. But the MJ12 documents leaked in 1984, and those were from a photographic negative, the old style of photography that we used to have before digital. But the majestic documents that eventually were collected by Bob and Ryan Wood, those are actual pieces of paper. Like those are physical paper documents that have been studied in great detail. And if you stack them all together, as I have done, I have a copy of the book around here somewhere. It's about this thick. So there's a lot of paper connected to it. And I've read through them all, and I just tend to think that there's probably something to it. Yeah. So I think that they deal with a high-level UFO-related secrecy program. And one of the majestic documents has become kind of famous. It's a November 12, 1963 memo supposedly written by President John F. Kennedy 10 days before he was assassinated. And it is a directive that he, again, supposedly gave to the CIA to have them coordinate with the Soviet Union on UFO sightings so as to prevent a nuclear war. That document was actually first collected in the Majestic files, which you could still find on majesticdocuments.com. And then around, I think 2010 or 2011, there was a researcher by the last name of Lester, and he said he got that same document through a FOIA request. And wow. I've not heard anyone, I even really haven't heard what Ryan Wood has to say about this, how you have this document that was obtained through FOIA, according to this researcher, but was also listed as a majestic document and is still for all these years. So I think there's something to it. And, but admittedly, like the late Stan Friedman used to talk about his gray basket, things that he didn't know if were exactly true or not exactly true. And I've sometimes taken that phrase for myself. And overall, I do support probably the existence of an organization like MJ12, or now what we may call Zodiac. I think there's truth to it, but I don't want to be definitive. It probably wouldn't be prudent.
That's fascinating, and that there's a correlation with very important people from Wilson to well, who knows, maybe even JFK, but even though I wouldn't make the conclusion. I don't know enough, like you said, the gray basket. But every whistleblower that has come forward, I feel like there's a responsibility to take them seriously, because I see this pattern of intimidation, which I'm sure you agree with, from Lou Elizondo, Jake Barber, I think similarly, David Grush. And these are people that are important. And a lot of people in the UFO community, they're like, oh, psyop, like immediately. Yeah. But it's like, what if there's true that their life is actually being threatened? By whom and why? And I feel like it's irresponsible, personally, to just disregard.
Well, I'm with you. And honestly, there's a very strong knee-jerk reaction that has always existed in this field. It happened, 40 years ago when the MJ12 documents first started to come out. People were, I think there's like this fear that a lot of people will have of seeming to be too credulous or too gullible. I think that's like the worst thing for someone. They'd rather be seen as dishonest than gullible. I honestly often think that that's the case. And so there's a strong psychological need to just say it's all a psyop, it's all fake. There, back in the late 1980s, there was the case of the famous so-called Hitler diaries that came out, and these were diaries. They looked authentic. They looked like it was Hitler's actual handwriting, and people were blown away, like, this can't be real. This is incredible. There was some famous German historian who said, yes, I think these are authentic. And then, comes out eventually it was a fake. It was a really elaborate hoax. And so that's the kind of thing that people are terrified of. That's like the worst thing. So you get this kind of opposite effect that you get within the UFO field because, researchers are already out on the fringe. They want to try to appear as logical, as rational as they can, and so they don't want to often go for these. And that's actually that's not a bad place to be. We want to be careful, but it can really go too far. When you have whistleblowers, we have people like Lou Elizondo, David Grush, or now Jake Barber, and there's others as well. You have to ask yourself, like, where's the lie about what they've actually claimed? Has anyone actually identified a genuine, I'm not talking about mistakes or misremembering this or that, that's different, but an actual lie that Lou Elizondo has actually perpetrated on the public? I cannot think of any. Same with Grush. These people are, I think I'm with you. I think we ought to assume that they are honest until proven otherwise, and we need to follow up on their leads until we have reason not to.
I think there's right, like there's a big missing piece of the puzzle when it comes to whistleblowers, and but I don't think they're lying, right? Like I see concern, and honestly, I didn't see the movie The Age of Disclosure, but I saw the trailer and I was seeing all these people, and I'm like, that to me is like almost concerning that they're like willing to like talk about this because it's like how serious this topic is. And I know a lot of people get excited about a post-disclosure world, love and light, and like you know, space. I don't know, like consciousness, but I don't know. When I'm kind of uncomfortable with this. I know this topic gets weird, right? Is there an actual national security concern here, a psychological intimidation almost to the military here and to us, or is there a little bit of everything going on? What do you think the phenomena represents, good or bad? But I mean, let's keep it to that because that was a lot that I just said there.
Yeah. No, I follow you. I mean, look, I've studied this now for about 30 years, and I've gone through my own path on this. I started out, I tried to be as conservative on this phenomenon as I could be. I used to tell myself, I don't even care what I think about it. I just try to gather together the information. I wanted to put it together, and weird things like psychic or like even abductions. I didn't want to go down that road at first, or crop circles. But the thing is, like, this is a subject that if you stay in it long enough, it's going to bring you into some very strange places. And I think that's because we very likely live in a much stranger world than we grew up believing we lived in. I think that was certainly the case for me. And so I don't mind going down rabbit holes any longer because some of them turn out to be pretty darned interesting. And I mean, there's a lot of other things that you were asking in that question, but I feel like we are encountering we're in an era now. So we have all these new whistleblowers coming out more and more. I feel like they have always they always have wanted to come out. I really believe that there's always been a desire for people on the inside to come out, but they clearly never felt that they would be safe to do so. And what we see happening, in my opinion, is we're getting to a kind of critical mass. Maybe we've already reached it, where enough insider people have come out, and they're not all even whistleblowers. I mean, think of like someone like Admiral Tim Gallaudet. He's not really a whistleblower per se, but he's a prestigious, high-ranking Navy officer who is putting himself out there saying, yes, this is real. Or someone like Carl Nell, of the U.S. Army is another one. He's not really being a whistleblower per se, but he's put himself out there as someone supportive of this. So there's more and more of these people. And I feel like this has always been the case. They've always existed within the military and the intelligence community, but they never felt secure that they could come out. And I think that's changing. So we're seeing, I think we're going to continue to see more people come out. Whether it's actually going to lead to disclosure and actual admission by the government, whether it's President Trump or anyone who follows him, that's a whole other question. Uh, we've had so many amazing bombshells that have dropped since 2017, honestly. And I often think back, like if I were to talk to myself from say like 2010, when I wrote After Disclosure, and if I were to tell that version of me, yeah, guess what? In a few years, the Navy's going to admit that they study UFOs. We're going to learn about a couple of secret UFO programs, ATIP, OSAP. We're going to learn that there's some video release of these incredible encounters the military's had, like, and all the other things that we've learned. 2010 version of me would have said, "Oh yeah, that's going to be disclosure for sure," and it didn't happen. It hasn't happened. We're not even close. We don't even have an admission by the government that these things are truly anomalous. They're still keeping it like, yeah, we don't know. We're going to look into it. We'll get back to you when we finish studying. No one believes that, but they're doing a great job at playing defense. I'll say that. So I don't know, what would it take? I ask myself almost all the time, what would it take for the US government to finally admit that it's real, they're here, and all of that? And I don't know. I think it's going to take a lot because they are definitely resisting.
I mean, it's a Pandora's box that, I mean, if I put myself president as the United States, where you're responsible for every American citizen, right? And you dropped this bombshell with unpredictable consequences. I I'm not sympathizing with the secrecy at all. I think it's messed up. I hate the collateral damages and experiences. I'm saying it's a complicated position to be in.
Mhm.
And but it's also fascinating how there's an effort. You see this effort, and then it's almost like every time that you get there, something happens where they make a 180 and they're like, eh, oh, by the way, I'll get back to you on those mysterious drones. I'll give you the truth. Then FAA approved. And we've seen that from Roswell to,
Yeah.
NASA every time. So what is going on there,
Well, I mean, honestly, and I include myself in this, but we often will take like a moral or moralistic view on UFO secrecy and the need for disclosure. So and I've done this many times. So again, we'll paint it as like a right versus wrong issue. The secrecy is wrong. It's damaging to our society. We need to come out with the truth, like that kind of thing. And I agree with that. But I just have to say, if we were to step back a little bit and get a different perspective on it, it really wouldn't be difficult to see why there would be these two different factions. That is the disclosure faction, but it wouldn't also be difficult to see why there's a very strong secrecy faction. Like, it's understandable that that happens. All you have to do is look back at the history. You go back to the 1940s. You play the game of being Harry Truman, the president at the time, and try to understand what were the things that motivated Truman and all the people around him to engage in that secrecy. And that's easy to see why in the context of that time period. And then the other problem with that is, like, once the secrecy gets going, that's a secret that becomes kind of difficult to unwind because it develops its own power, its own momentum, its own profit. If you're studying, retrieved technology, for example. So it becomes hard to extricate yourself from. And I think that's part of the problem we're having. And it's developed its whole bureaucracy. And again, I'm not saying that isn't a problem, but it's really not difficult, I should think, to understand why we're seeing this back and forth. So every time there may be a movement toward more openness, I think we should expect that there's going to be pressures on the other side pushing things back. And we're watching it. It's like a tug of war going on right now.
100%. And with time, we're making progress. It's just kind of slow. It's not, you can't be here for instant gratification, or you're going to go crazy if that's what you want. It's not going to work. So I want to touch on USOs too. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier about the missing piece on like the whistleblowers and all that, I remember there was a story in Imminent on the Roosevelt. Ryan Graves said they were seeing these things every day. To me,
Yes.
that's mind blowing that they were seeing them. People kind of forget about that, right?
It's amazing. It blows my mind. That story, for people who aren't aware, so Ryan Graves, former Navy pilot, and we learned about him back in, I think it was 2019, when Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal of the New York Times did a piece on him. And it was really good. It was a very good article. And they talked all about he was part of the USS Roosevelt group, and they were out in the Atlantic off the US East Coast. And I think they said in 2014 and through 2015, they were encountering UAP, UFOs almost daily, as you just mentioned. And that was over a like 9-month period of time. I tried figuring out, like, you're talking about 270 days. If you're having them daily, that would be 270 encounters. I'm not saying they had that many, but they had a lot. And you are totally right to say, like, why are we not talking about that? What were some of those other encounters? We'd like to know. We know of the one where he describes, you get the two FA-18A, the FA-18 Super Hornets. They're flying in tandem, and one object flies between them, a cube within a sphere. That's what it was. Crazy.
And how much does that really happen? We have no idea because
Right.
I'm at this point where what do? You go to Arrow every time you see this, if you see it all the time, or and you touch on something that I mean you haven't touched, but I followed you where these objects affect our Navy destroyers. They will shut them down, some sort of electromagnetic
Oh my God.
EMP.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing an article the other day, not the other day, like a year ago, but it didn't say anything about UFOs. It was like Navy destroyer, 30 minutes, loses power. Nobody has any idea why. And I'm thinking, that's weird. And then you touch on this, and that is that's to me is it's super important. And what do you do? Because that's like war, right? When you're jamming, if you're doing these things to our Navy or our military, um, then that's a definition by war. But you shoot these things down when they're more advanced. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
complicated. I'm not even sure what my question was there. I'm just kind of ranting.
Well, I'll just jump in on that. I was, I'm finishing, I've written out all the cases for a 3-volume history of USOs. Although I'm still adding a couple of new cases to volumes 2 and 3. Turns out I was working on them this morning. But I've got almost 700 of these cases that I've been finding dealing with water-based UAP, essentially. And the military ones are kind of shocking. So you mentioned, that these objects have been seen like disabling U.S. warships. And I've been saying this because in the research that I've done on USOs, that's exactly what's happened. There are a couple of cases of U.S. aircraft carriers losing communication and sometimes weapon systems as a result of encounters with these objects. Now, that's not the same as telling people we have FOIA documentation that's been fully confirmed by the Department of Defense. No, I cannot say that. But we have quite a few retired sailors who have talked about these with a high level of consistency over a very long period of time, going back to the 1950s, through the 60s and 70s and 80s, and beyond into the 90s as well, perhaps even in the 21st century. So we have instances of these objects hanging out very close to U.S. warships, appearing, and sometimes causing them to go to battle stations, and yes, disabling certain key aspects of the operation of the ship, including sometimes weapons. And also the Russians have dealt with this as well, at least on several occasions.
Yeah, people seem to say, "Oh, it's China, Russia," and to me, when you really look at it from a geopolitical perspective of what reconnaissance means, spying, how much money we spend on our military, it doesn't make sense. And that they're dealing with that, the Chinese, I wish I knew Chinese and Russian because it seems such an important, to me,
Yeah.
try to figure it out, but But I was also gonna ask, changing man, I kind of lost my question there. It was kind of going with this. But let's see. What about do you think studying like experiences where abductions have slowed down? Because I never hear about abductions anymore.
Yeah, I wonder about this. Back abductions became a huge thing in the UFO community, really during the 1980s, particularly. That was like the big decade. You had Bud Hopkins writing books. You had a lot of new research by John Mack and David Jacobs were kind of peripheral, but by the early 90s, they were really big in the abduction space. And it was just being talked about a lot. And there were a lot of others, Carla Turner and lots of other folks. And there are still abduction researchers out there. I mean, I know there's Kathleen Martin and Yvonne Smith, and Barbara Lamb is still going. I don't know if she's retired or not, but they're out there. But you don't really get a lot of new research being published. I'm not aware of it myself. And I do certainly think that people are still having these experiences. I mean, just off the record, I've spoken to a number of people who've described things that appear to be at least potential abduction experiences in recent years. But I'm not really getting a lot in the community about it. So maybe it's just going through a cycle. Partly, I'm a little concerned because since 2017, we've been talking about UFOs, now UAP, in a much more open way. But to my perspective, a lot of the conversation's almost very sanitized. It's like we're taking it back to the very basic level, mainly because the mainstream's now getting involved. And so because the mainstream's involved, people are like basically ground zero here, and they need to be, it's almost like sending you back to kindergarten class with UFOs. And I think that abductions have just gotten kind of forgotten.
That's kind of sad. I mean, somebody's got to be doing this research because it's an important, part to figure out
Yes,
what could the agenda be of these
I
things.
agree. Yeah.
Somebody's got to be doing that work, and I wonder how much of it is exactly what you said, and maybe also researchers maybe a little scared to touch it because they don't want to be that. You know what I mean? But that's an
I think
important.
I will make a prediction. I think that abductions will make a resurgence at some point in this field. It might be another 10 years from now or whenever, but it will happen. And I think it's just going to happen because I'm pretty confident it's still going on. And there's inevitably going to be a researcher who just takes the bull by the horns and goes in and does some good research on it. So I'm hoping that will happen.
I hope so. One that I remember what I wanted to say. You got your data for your USO book on. I think it was MUFON and what was the other?
Couple of places. Yeah, so I went into three large databases to look for USO related cases. So one, I'll tell them in the order that I did them. The first one that I went into was from the late Carl Feit. Carl Feit, I think he died in 2019. He was in his 80s. He was a great guy and a very good researcher who did a lot of work on UFOs and water. The physical interaction of water with UFO craft. Carl was very interested. So we had a lot of USO cases in there. He also did cases of like UFOs in the rain and in snow and fog and things like that. But he had them with bodies of water. And Carl had put together a decent database of that. I plundered that database. And then there was the National UFO Reporting Center, or NUFORC, which is run by Peter Davenport. That's fully open, public access. Anyone can get access to the NUFORC database. And there's many cases in there. And then finally, I was able to get access to the MUFON database called their CMS, the case management system. That was nice because I'm not a MUFON investigator, and technically you're normally supposed to be a MUFON investigator, but they knew the kind of research I was doing and just said, have at it, which was great. On top of those three, I've gone through a lot of other sources that like out of print magazines of all national languages and cultures, and old websites, some of which are no longer existing, but you can get them through the Wayback Machine and places like that. So I've really tried to be as comprehensive as I'm able to. I'm sure I'm missing things, but I've done my best to try to collect them. These USO cases were scattered all over the place. There really wasn't a single good repository for them all. And that was one of my motivations for doing this 3-volume study.
I will add, at one time there was a lunar eclipse, and I remember seeing a UAP, and people at work were talking about it. A lot of people. It's a kind of a mass sighting in Minnesota, where I'm at, and I tried reporting it to MUFON, and it was they asked so many questions, I didn't do it. And then I looked, because I'm like, well, it was a mass sighting. People were talking about it at work.
They were just being kind of difficult or a little picayune, or
Well,
what
they
was
were
what was
asking so many detailed questions. This is what I remember, that I kind of was like, I don't want to. I was lazy. I was lazy about it. And then I looked a little bit forward, and nobody reported it. And I'm like, wow. People were talking about it at work, and I'm kind of the only one interested at work that's fascinated by. So I think that's very important.
Yeah.
What you're talking about. It's more. It's at least I was lazy about it, and the fact that nobody reported a mass sighting that people were talking about it at work speaks volume.
Most people never report their UFO sighting. Almost never happens. Anytime I'm in a public place and I remember to do this, I will ask the audience, just like a simple little thing. How many of you saw a UFO? Raise your hand. Up go the hands. And then I'll say, only keep your hand up if you reported it to some organization. And inevitably, 9/10 of the hands go down. And this is at UFO events where you think people are more motivated.
Right.
And even it's like 1 out of 10, maybe. So most people do not report these things that they see.
And one more thing, there's a nuclear connection, and these, which I think is a big missing piece of the whole Roosevelt incident. I was on the road that they were baiting. I didn't understand what they were doing, but it had to do something with nuclear. I don't know.
It was crazy.
What I didn't understand.
I'm gonna have to ask Lou this. I mean, I talk with him, and I haven't asked. I should. So the story is, he writes in his book Imminent, which I think is a very informative. I think it's a very interesting book. So he says, and he didn't really give a time frame exactly, but I'm thinking maybe sometime after 2010. He said, we were aware that these objects are attracted to nuclear materials and they're attracted to water. He said, we knew both of those things. So we developed a plan. This was in connection with, I don't want to get this wrong. I forget which office it was. I don't think it was the CIA. That was a nice recovery. You're on your other device and it looks good.
Okay. All right, cool.
I was just saying, with Lou's claim, he basically said, we had this operation. Oh yeah, this is how they captured the gimbal video, I think he said. We were out there, so that had to be 2015. Mm-hmm. We had we had nuclear ordnance, I think he said, out in the Atlantic Ocean, and we just waited for them to come down because we thought that they would, and we wanted to record them. And that's what he said in the book.
That's like, what are we doing there? We're playing with fire, and especially since they say they were seeing these things every
Very
day.
strange. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Puerto Rican, so I grew up in Puerto Rico till I was 22 years old. So, and you mentioned Puerto Rico quite a bit.
Yep.
When I hear your USO talking about USOs, so
absolutely.
So I don't know if you could talk about that, a little bit.
Well, yes, I'd be happy to. I think Puerto Rico has got to get the rank as the #1 USO hotspot in the world, at least that I'm aware of. I can't think of a place that really, even people like to talk about Catalina Island off the Southern California coast, and that is an active area. And there are other active areas, without a doubt. But there's something about Puerto Rico that I really do think is special. And there's a couple of areas around Puerto Rico where the activity is it's actually all around the island, but I would say it's a little less on the southern coast than the other ones, at least as far as what I could track. But it's pretty much everywhere. And then you have also Laguna Cartagena, which is the big lake there, and there's sightings there, but mostly around the ocean. So you have the big Puerto Rico Trench north of the island. That is an absolute hotspot area. And that trench goes down 5 or 6 miles, I think about 6 miles at one point. Incredibly deep.
Mhm.
And there have been instances when objects have been tracked by the U.S. Navy going into that trench. So that's what we hear. And then you've got on the eastern end of the island is Roosevelt Roads, which is where the U.S. Navy has a major installation there.
Stay by and Vieques, they used to have
Facing,
military bases there.
that's right, facing Vieques Island there. And that's a very active area for UFO aerial sightings and water-based USOs, absolutely. And then on the western end of the island, as you get out toward Isla Mona Island there, a little
My mom's from Aguadilla, so that's right next. That's
Aguadilla.
yeah.
That whole area, that's in the north, the west, but then going down to, I think Cabo Rojo, is that right? The
Cabo
south,
Rojo, yep, that's the south.
southwest. That whole area is very, very active. I'm shocked by the number of cases I've uncovered there. And I have no doubt that there's multiple times that I just probably haven't even found. Aguadilla, of course, is the scene of the famous infrared video from 2013, which is very interesting. But Aguadilla is also the scene of just a lot of other stories going way back through the decades. One of my favorite ones is of a guy who was a fisherman and a scuba diver out of Aguadilla, and he's fishing. This is like around 1990. He's fishing a couple of miles off the shore there, and he was a single witness. We just have his testimony to go on, but he said, "Look, I'm out in my boat, and I see this bright light under the water. It looked like it was from like a round object." And he had his equipment with him to dive. So he threw it on, he goes into the water, and he said, "Yes, I saw this." I think this was 1989 or 1990. He said, "I saw this, it was a flying saucer under the water." And when he got up to it, it had these little grids on it where on one side you could feel suction, the water going in, and on the other side he swam to that and he felt the water coming out. It was almost like it was a big filtration system. So he actually touched this craft. And then he started getting scared and went back into his boat. And I think he was considering going back into the water a second time, but when he looked again, the object was no longer there. But
Wow,
that's by Aguadilla. And
So-
there's other cases out in that area.
I will say this, and I think we've gone over 30 minutes already. I'm not sure, but I will add this to the Aguadilla point. When I was growing up in Puerto Rico, I never heard about UFOs. I wasn't interested in this topic until way later in life. But my grandpa used to have this guy, his neighbor. They were very, very close, and we used to call him crazy because of back to the aliens, right? Back to the aliens. And his house was right next to the ocean in Aguadilla. And he was an abductee. He was claimed to, be abducted by aliens and all the time. So that's interesting that later in life, he died. He was an old man, but my grandpa always loved him and was like, "Gary, just shut up about aliens already." But it's interesting. That's all I'm saying. It's interesting that he lived right next to the ocean and he was going through that. So yeah. Anyway, Richard, you've been great, man. Thank you a lot.
I've loved it. I'm glad to come back, and we'll do it again, Christian.
All right, man. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you.